Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the library tour of Doom. This is a library tour through all of my books, conducted by myself and Lord Ganesha. A few of you have asked when is Lord Ganesha going to host an episode? He doesn't like you. He doesn't like anybody, except maybe the ladies. He's a big fan of the ladies, and they, inexplicably, are big fans of his. But one way or another, you're stuck with me. And today we're going back to 2016 for a book that's a little bit bittersweet, but not that much, since he comes for all of us in time. This is Clive James, the great book reviewer and great TV critic. He had a TV criticism column for 10 years, raised the bar on the whole genre. As a lively commentator, and also present in this room, directly behind Lord Ganesha, pardon me, Your Highness, is his Cultural Amnesia. That's a copy of his Cultural Amnesia, which is a collection of his book criticism. Really, really, really good stuff. He was terrific at it. And this book is called Play All, a binge watcher's notebook. And it's in part an outgrowth of his long experience reviewing TV. It's in part an outgrowth of his curiosity with the way TV changed in the 21st century. Suddenly became incredibly long and interconnected melodramas that were more properly viewed over a whole season than one episode at a time. He was really good at taking episodic TV and seeing it for what it was, finding the larger themes and the glories and the hidden shames and whatnot. But with these things, they're meant to be watched that way. And so he examines things like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or The West Wing. These things that are almost always viewed as one whole production that just happens to have taken place in many seasons. So the book is an outgrowth of those two things. I believe it was also an outgrowth of the fact that when he wrote this, he was ill. He had two competing but potentially deadly diseases that were at a race to see which could wear him down the most. He was as strong as a goat, so it took a long time. But this book was at the end of his life, and I think it was probably more comfortable for him. He couldn't stop writing, and he couldn't stop thinking critically about everything, even though he was really funny, could be really funny, and could be as playful as anybody else. He couldn't stop thinking critically about. You can't really do that once you start. And I think this might also be a reflection of the fact that he was flat on his back a lot of the time and didn't have the concentration to read. Because if you read Cultural Amnesia or anything else that he wrote, his reading wasn't just reading the book. It was also then ranging across the whole of a library. To pack as much into a piece of deadline prose as could be packed in by anybody. You get to the if you're in your 8th round of chemo or whatnot, you're not gonna feel like doing that, and there might even be an argument that you're not able to do it anymore. And he wouldn't have wanted professional hack critics like him, the virtuosos, the one a lot of whom are on that shelf now that I think about it, would usually wanted to do anything rather than appear mentally undressed in front of an audience that had been reading them for years. So they would just back away from that sort of thing. William F. Buckley, for instance, who's not on this shelf, got to a point in his life where he would simply, a review copy would come in the mail to him with an importuning note from an editor, and he would say, "I'm just not up to this anymore." And he knew perfectly well, and so did the editor, that if he'd done something that was 30% of what he once was capable of, it would still have had his name on it. It would still have sold papers. He just didn't want to do it. Fortunately, Clive James is brilliant in this book. He was brilliant right to the end. And he's brilliant in this book on all of the shows that he examines. The Sopranos and Breaking Bad are shows that don't interest me at all. I've watched their whole length, but they celebrate moral depravity. As dumb as it sounds, as Sunday school sissy as it sounds, I don't like that. I want a hero. I don't need the hero to be perfect, but I don't want to just be wallowing in a world where no one is heroic, and that's the whole point. I don't want to do that, and which is why things like Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or even Game of Thrones just didn't do it for me. But he also reviews The West Wing. For those of you who don't know what that is a fairly great Aaron Sorkin TV show about a fictional president, Josiah Jed Bartlett, And all the people that run his administration, all the adventures that they have, the catastrophes they encounter, the moral dilemmas that they have to face and parse somehow. It can get a little preachy, The West Wing. It can get a little bit moralizing, but it is so good. It is just so good, in large part because of the talent that was assembled. And I want to read you just one bit. I won't make these long, I promise. I want to make you read you just one bit here that shows Clive James at his best and also at his most typical when he's writing about The West Wing, and specifically about Jed Bartlet, the president at the heart of the show. Jed Bartlet is an intellectual president. Previously in the 20th century, there had been scarcely one of these. Theodore Roosevelt read everything, including, unfortunately, too many books about eugenics. We'll pass on. Woodrow Wilson perhaps rated as a thinker, but FDR, though there wasn't much he couldn't understand, he even understood the atomic bomb when the idea was eventually brought to him, was notable for applying his powers of reason more to everyday political detail than to the sweep of history. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, is more an advertising slogan than a thought. Harry Truman, still the most underrated of the modern presidents, had considerable book learning, but it is a secret now because it was a secret then. He found it expedient to make himself sound ordinary. LBJ, that's Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ's intelligence was underrated because of his cornball manners, but he can hardly be thought of as one who lived by the light of reason. JFK's reputation for mental scope was largely constructed by those around him. It was Richard Nixon who could play the piano, but JFK got credentials as a music lover because Jackie sat him down in public to listen to Pablo Casals. Lately, Barack Obama published at least one good book which he actually wrote, but his idea of profundity was to announce that a vote for him would stop the ocean rising. Theodore Roosevelt was not a proponent of eugenics, and Obama didn't say that, and he said a lot of other things. But anyway, we won't parse. All those real-life presidents were smart, but even with their reputations rolled together, they don't add up to Jed Bartlet, who, in one of any number of illustrative scenes, gives us an account of exactly why developments in the cultivation of wheat present a decisive objection to Malthusian theories about imminent world starvation. President Bartlet started off as an economist at an exalted level and has somehow managed to go on acquiring knowledge even while embroiled in the full-time job of gaining political advancement. The only comparable presidential figure in American history is Lincoln, whose brilliance was confined to the English language. When Bartlet, after the accidental death of his beloved old secretary Mrs. Landingham, lingers in the church to unleash a defiant speech against God, he delivers it in Latin. Now, some of that is critical telescoping. Those of you who are West Wing fanatics will know the episode about Norman Borlaug and wheat production, and you will know that the observations about Malthusian overpopulation are spread out amongst a number of characters, not just Jed Bartlet holding court in that episode. And you might notice something else, not those of you who are West Wing fanatics, but those of you who are perhaps junkies of 20th century American politics. There's a rogues gallery there of U.S. presidents, all of which are rated as not intellectual. If Theodore Roosevelt wasn't an intellectual in the White House, I don't know what would. He read more than Clive James did. And that is something, because Clive James read a lot, and Theodore Roosevelt read more. And he ripped the guts out of a book, as Johnson used to say about himself. He ripped the guts out of a book. So he wasn't just skimming. He knew the contents and could discourse on them at great length, and in more than one language. But even if we leave him out, you'll notice some of the names that Clive James is not mentioning there. He doesn't even bother to mention Ronald Reagan, for instance, in the context of whether or not a president is intellectual, although his claim that Harry Truman buried an aesthetic genius under layers and layers of ordinary. Prove it, is what I would say if he were still around for me to yell at. And he also doesn't mention George H.W. Bush. Feel very strongly about that. Having accomplished everything I set out to do, in one term, I saw no reason for a second. I come with gift for warming of house and find you wrestling with local wolf. But you'll notice, okay, those are easy targets, but you notice someone else who's missing from that lineup. A conspicuously smart U.S. president is missing from that lineup. And it's because that U.S. president, even decades later, is a figure of such radioactive hatred for Clive James and all of his cohorts. Fenton, Hitchens, you name it. There's a figure missing who is a figure of such radioactive hatred that Clive James can't even include him in order to dismiss him. And that figure's, of course, a Rhodes Scholar named Bill Clinton. He can't even bring him up. Bill Clinton is, more than any of the other people that he names, the sort of one step removed inspiration for Jed Bartlett. And yet, he can't bring himself to do it. He can't bring himself to include Bill Clinton, even to dismiss him. Hilarious. And it's a sign of showing that appreciation is soaring. I hope you agree. That appreciation is just fantastic. It will stick with you forever. All of the appreciations in here will. I can only imagine how much more. I love this book. I can only imagine how much more you would love it if you loved The Sopranos or Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones. He gives them lovingly detailed attention. Just wonderful. It's just wonderful stuff from start to finish. Clive James always is, so that's no big revelation. And this book, I found it elsewhere here at Hyde Cottage, but I realized it belongs in here, so I'll put it in here. I won't bother to repatriate it. I'll bring it right in here. So that's it. That's your library tour for today. But we will see if there is one tomorrow. I mentioned that there might not be any videos this weekend. I'm hoping that I was wrong about that, but they may decrease in number. You never know. You never know. One way or another, the next time, who knows what it could be. Another work of popular criticism, a play of Shakespeare, a book on dogs. Who knows? We'll find out at the same time. Thank you, BookTube.